All right. You guys know the verse by now? Everybody read it with me. Luke 16:8. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. Does that pierce your heart when you read that? God's saying that the world the world behaves more wisely in the world than my own kids do. And to me, I'm thinking, boy, that should not be the case. And so we've been challenging you the last couple weeks to learn a lesson from the missionaries, and I won't go into all the detail because I think most of you have been here the last 2 Sundays. But the missionary movement in America learned something. They learned that when we go overseas and we try to do everything for people, it ends up crippling them and making them dependent and causing a bigger problem in the long term than if we hadn't helped them at all. And if you're going to help somebody, you don't want to do it in a way that ends up making things worse, right? How many of you know the church is all about helping people? But how many of you know a lot of times the help that goes on in the church is not done wisely? You still with me? I worked at a food and clothing giveaway for years. I was the manager of it. My responsibility, people would line up literally 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, long line of people in the freezing cold to get their groceries. When I first started there, they didn't even have the clothes hung up. These people had to literally root through boxes to try to find their size. And it was a mess. And so, over time we got it all straightened out. We got it organized. We got the clothing racked and sized. And we tried to treat people with dignity. But, something that I learned was that after about, 8 years of doing that ministry, I learned that we were still doing the same thing for the same people 8 years later. And something inside of me started going, there has got to be a better way to do this. You've all heard the term of giving somebody a fish, right? That it's better to teach them how to fish than to give them a fish. Now, there are appropriate times to give people fish, right? Just like in a MASH, in a war, you've got a MASH unit. The MASH unit's responsibility is, we're not going to do the best surgery. We're not going to make you perfect. What we're going to do is patch you up good enough to get you out of here, and so you're going to survive. And so I believe that the church has to have MASH-type operations. There need to be systems in place where we're just giving somebody something to keep them from going over the edge, right? But long term, the church's responsibility is not to give people handouts. Long term, the church's responsibility is to walk alongside people and to train them to be the best that they can be. Right? You still with me? Come on, is everybody still with me this morning? Give me a little feedback. I like the feedback, alright? Give me some chatter. Share the love a little bit. Okay, now, we talked about this last week, or 2 weeks ago. That the 2 lessons that we learned is, one, that doing a good thing from a wrong assumption can end up hurting more than helping. And we talked about wrong lenses that people wear. And one of the wrong lenses that people wear is that I have to be perfect before I can help someone else. How many of you have ever felt that? I have to have my life all together before I can really help somebody else get their life together. And this is one of the biggest things. People think I have to be able to pray perfectly before I start praying. I have to be able to know the whole Bible before I start teaching. You know the best way to learn the Bible? Honestly, the best way to learn it is to teach it. I'm telling you, when you teach, it's almost a scary thing. And it's like, when you dig into it because you're trying to help other people, I can guarantee you that you're probably the one learning more than anybody else in the room. So you think about it. What are some of the deficits in your life right now? What are some of the things where you feel like you're just not quite there yet? You're just not quite good enough? There's a good chance that maybe that's the very area that you should step up and start giving a little. Because the way you learn how to do something isn't by sitting and just watching someone else do it every week. The way you learn how to do something is by getting up and doing it. Right? Still with me? Okay, so that's the one filter, and we talked about the grasshopper syndrome. How many of you have ever had the grasshopper syndrome before? You just feel like some of the situations of life are just so much bigger than you, and sometimes you feel so inadequate. We were in a situation similar to that, and I had to keep on reminding myself. We're in a car dealership the other day, and Tim was with me, and you know what? It's like, I had some moments that were really fantastic, and I went in there with confidence, and there was one moment in that interview, a guy asked me this question about money, and I looked like a deer in the headlights. I just went, and Tim stepped in, basically, and saved the day for me. But there was this moment in that negotiation. It was a negotiation. I mean, in a car dealership, it's a negotiation. Everybody's trying to come out with the best deal possible. That dealer's not in there because he's in it for a blessing. He's not really concerned about you walking out with a big blessing. So it's a negotiation. And there was a moment in that negotiation when I forgot who I was. I just got intimidated. This guy knows financing. I don't know financing. And thankfully Tim did step in, and then, things kind of got back on track again. But are there moments in life where you feel like a grasshopper, where you're in a situation that is just so much bigger than you? And you know what? The truth is that because of the way we're wired, we're going to be confronted with these situations often. It's not that we're always going to feel like, we're mighty, but it's like we got to remind ourselves. Mike, who is it that lives inside of you? Do you realize that you're a transporter of the Lord Jesus Christ, and that when you walk into a situation, you carry His presence with you. You carry His understanding. You carry His wisdom. You carry His knowledge. And so if you'll just take a few minutes to adjust yourself, then wait a minute. I brought God in the room with me. And you just take a moment. You just got to sometimes you just got to calm yourself down, and you got to focus. You got to ground and center. I'll never forget, I was doing this one exercise one time. If you can imagine this, I've done it twice now, where it's a 30-foot telephone pole. Now, how many know that telephone pole is about maybe yay big around? And in this exercise, what you do is the telephone pole's got staples on it, big staples. They're about yay long, and they're on both sides of the pole, and they're staggered. And you're harnessed in, so you're not going to kill yourself. But what you do is you climb to the top of this telephone pole. How many of 30 feet's pretty high? It's pretty doggone high. And so what you're doing is you got the hardest part's the last step, because what you got to do is you got to. Okay, now you're not on the staples anymore, and there's nothing with your hands anymore. So the hardest part is this part right here on top of the pole, and it's not much wider than your feet are. And when you're doing this, the whole pole's starting to. How many of you know the more you shake, the more the pole starts to like this. And in your mind, you're strapped in, but there comes a moment where it's just natural, where your knees start to do this, right? And what do you think happens when your knees start to do this? And I'm telling you what, there's this moment up there, if you can do this, where you just go, and you just forget about the height, and you forget about the distance, and you forget about all the people that are standing around, and you forget about the crowd that's down around the bottom of the pole. You forget about the harnesses on you. And if you get focused in that moment, the first time I did this was in the mountains of California, and we're in a redwood forest. And I'm on top of a 30-foot pole in the middle of a redwood forest. And it was spectacular. And there comes this moment where you just let the pressure of the world just drain out of you. And you're in that moment on top of that pole. And it's like you're on top of the world. You own the pole. Now let me say that a little bit different, because what's really happening is you own your fear. Your fear doesn't own you. You own your fear. I want you to think about how many things in life there are that own you. Barriers that you've not been able to break through. Things that your heart desires that you've not been able to go after. Confrontations with people that you know that you need to have, but you haven't found the courage to have yet. Things that you want to try in life that you've never tried because there's this fear that keeps on pushing you down and telling you that you're not smart enough, you're not wise enough, you're not financially sound enough, you're not whatever. It could be that you haven't had your children yet because you're not ready. You haven't got married yet because you're not ready. Or you haven't stepped into that new business that you want to create because you're not ready. And whatever it is, God is just waiting for us to break through those fears. He's just waiting for us to get past that grasshopper mentality and to realize that you're the one that I died for. Not the giant, you. I didn't shed my blood for that hairy, stinky giant that's controlling you. I shed my blood for you. I shed my blood for you. And when I'm inside of you, there's nothing that you can't accomplish. If I've put it in your heart to do it, it can be done. It can be done. I want it to be done. I'll help it to be done. I'll walk alongside of you to get it done. But it's time for you to expand. It's time for you to grow to the fullness of your potential. Is anybody ready to get rid of the grasshopper mentality? Again, we're all going to have it from time to time. It's a matter of refocusing and getting over it. God tells us not to despise the day of small beginnings. You know, starting out small, whether it's a small church or whether it's a small business or whether it's a small family or whether it's a small vision, whatever it is, you know, don't feel bad because it's small. Everything great starts out small. He says, don't despise the day of small things. You watch what I can do with small things. It's just don't allow yourself to have a small mentality. Don't allow yourself to be confined to a small prison cell. All it takes is a tiny seed to produce the greatest tree. And the entire DNA of that tree is in that seed. The entire DNA of your fullest potential is in you right now. This past week I was standing in front of corporate execs and I was doing things that 5 years ago I never thought I would ever do. I was in an arena that I never thought I'd be in, doing things that I never thought I could ever do. Was I scared? Yeah, there were moments. Ground and center. Who is it that's inside of you? I'm not in this environment to be impacted. I'm not in this environment to be held down and held back. I'm not in this environment to be limited. I'm in this environment to change things. I'm in this environment to change things. I'm in this environment to be the influence. I'm in this environment to release the power and the potential of the God that lives inside of me. And man, when you come focused back to that moment, it's amazing. It's amazing. Now, the next filter that often people wear, and this one's just as dangerous as the first one, is that we, if we're not careful, tend to see the people that we want to help as being too messed up to help themselves. We look at them as being poor people.